awesome to be back at IO. It's such an amazing festival, and thank you all for coming out. My name is Emily, and I have a background in visual design and interaction design.
Hi, my name's Theo Watson, and I have a background in sort of interactive installations. I'm also co-founder of Open Frameworks, along with Zach Lieberman, who is here at the festival, and Arturo Castro. I'm part of a group called Graffiti Research Lab. Together, we work as Design IO, and we really see the kind of process of the work that we do as a combination of design, research, and programming. So in a way, it's sort of like using code to do this, and then sort of transforming it into something like this. We actually kind of think of code and design both as tools, and we really see them as tools for kind of creating wonder and delight.
And really what we're passionate about and kind of specialize in is creating these immersive interactive environments that are built to support open play. So instead of experiences that are more directive or game-like, just really can support exploration and discovery.
This is a project called Funky Forest, which we presented last year at I/O. There's a little bit of feedback from the speaker, just so you guys know. And this is an early project of ours called Daisies. Very simple, like interactive floor. A crazy interactive installation called Knee Deep, where children step into worlds of different scale. An interactive magazine cover, or kind of augmented magazine cover that allows you to experience the world of rise and fall. And also some generative sort of posters that combine code and design called Here to There. These are all sort of our older projects and projects we presented last year, and we're really excited to show you guys some new stuff this year and actually take you through the process from like prototyping to final installation.
Yeah. So the first project is called Night Bright, which was developed for a children's cafe called Bumble in Los Altos. And they got in touch with us originally asking if they could have a version of Funky Forest for their space. So we went out for a site visit and immediately knew that that would not be possible. The ceilings were kind of at an angle, which was hard for floor projection, and there were some crazy beams, so we couldn't use mirrors.
It was way, way too small. It was like half the size or something.
And then another issue is that they wanted to use it as a mixed-use space, and it was also a sunroom, which is kind of ridiculous to want a projection environment in a sunroom.
It was like 6 or 7 skylights. Yeah. So we were a little bit skeptical, but they seemed up for the challenge. So
yeah, they were determined to make that work. So then we got some test footage and went back to our studio and started coming up with ideas.
So we were thinking about kind of this idea of maybe doing sort of a kind of a version of Funky Forest or something similar, but that was maybe like a nighttime forest where you could actually explore the forest and investigate it by shining light into it and to try and discover the things that lived within it. So we made a very rough prototype that was sort of using a shader to kind of light up an interactive environment. And this was just done at a small scale in our office. But once we knew that it worked, it was sort of like, okay, now let's kind of get on to the next phase.
And before we start doing any designing or anything, we usually kind of come up with this design plan where we're thinking really about our audience and trying to block out what types of interaction will work at different levels. So then we kind of have this plan to go back to for both programming and design to know, like, okay, what sort of behaviors will work good up here and what will not. And then we get into the sketching phase and started trying to scan textures and imagine what a nighttime forest would look like.
Another big issue is kind of figuring out the scale of things. And it's crazy when you're working like just on an LCD screen in your office, how far off you can be in terms of the scale. So often, as much as possible, we try and project at actual scale and see, like, kind of readjust the ground plane and just like shift things even by a few inches. And sometimes those few inches make all the difference in terms of sort of how immersive and how kind of connected you feel to the space. So it's like just some tests.
So then once we have an idea of the scale, then we can really get into the production process because we know about how big to make things and where things need to be. So I usually I'll sketch out characters and scan them in, and then I kind of make a guide when I'm thinking about animation of where all of the pivot points need to be, and then kind of what sort of personalities I want them to have. And then this, you can see we kind of do a combination of some 3D animation and some 2D, because I can't quite get the nice 2D quality in 3D yet. So we end up with these sequences that we output, and then we bring them into the application and control them programmatically. So what I'll end up doing is we kind of go back to that original design plan, and I'll give Theo this Photoshop guide that kind of lays out where everything needs to be, and we write a lot of XML for placement of things as well. And basically, because the whole idea with this installation is really about using your body to light up the forest. So the closer that you get to the screen, the brighter your light is, and then the deeper that you can see into the forest. So even though things are 2D, we kind of built it out into these layers.
So here you can kind of see, whoa, that looks crazy from this angle. You can kind of see how it's actually this kind of layer-based 3D environment. So here is just a screen capture, and you can kind of see, it's a little bit hard, I guess the gamma is a bit crazy, but you can see that as you rotate, you can rotate your perspective within the forest. We actually originally were going to have the kids move kind of as they move to kind of shift the perspective, but we tried it and it was really, really nauseating because everything was like moving around you, and so that never actually worked out. This is sort of the kind of debug screen that we use when we're actually working on the project. And one of the things one of the tools we developed was a kind of auto kind of analysis of the assets that were loaded into it. So any PNG or PNG sequence that gets loaded into it gets a contour from the alpha channel. And then from that, we can know, like the birds can know, like where they should land because they only look at, like they're only looking at horizontal branches on the tree. And then also all the creatures know about where the trees are. So for example, like the raccoon might go up to one of the trees and start scratching its claws on it. And this made it really easy to actually kind of completely change the design as we were going and not have to change any of the code. Another thing we use a lot in our projects are control panels, and sort of a lesson that we learned from a friend of ours called Memo from MSA Visuals. He likes to hook up as many things as possible to sliders, and it's actually, once you start doing that, it gets addictive. It's so nice not to have to like stop an application and then recompile the code, and like just to be able to tweak the interaction in a very quick way really just saves a lot of time, and I think actually leads a lot to the kind of the final thing. So this was it when it was first installed in the space.
Which you could see they managed to get the room completely dark.
Yeah, we didn't kind of believe them until the day, but and we're just going to play you a little video of the project. And there were these things called the kind of firefly bushes, and you could actually use your light to make them grow. And when you grew them, they would leave the bushes and then actually fly around trying to find other creatures for you to discover. So they were kind of like your friends or your guides for the forest. And sound was another really important aspect in this project because it's almost like a game of hide and seek, where you're really listening to the sounds in the environment and then trying to find the creatures. And some of them are afraid of you, and some of them are curious by the light that you bring. And others will only come out when the forest is really quiet and there's not a lot of activity in the space. This is all rather chaotic. And then this little bird has babies sometimes. So actually that project we didn't really talk about the kind of tracking, but we were using the Kinect for the tracking of that project. And it's sort of actually this last year, it's become our de facto tool, whereas before it was like infrared cameras and infrared lighting. Another project we did, and we showed at I/O last year, was this Kinect puppet prototype. We did this in a few hours one evening when the Kinect was first hacked. And we really liked this idea of like, could we analyze the joints of the arm, and then from that kind of can use that to control a bird or some crazy creature. When you open your hand, it sees the points of your hand. This is after a few beers. Opens his mouth and he screeches. Hey. So we posted this project online, and kind of like with a lot of the early Connect projects, it kind of blew up, and we kind of just started seeing it everywhere. And I think everyone was a bit nervous about Microsoft's reaction, and actually they ended up really embracing it. They put it on their website, and they even actually put it in, without telling us, they put it into a commercial. Well, it has Doc Brown from Back to the Future, so that kind of completely cancelled out, the other part of it. But they actually photoshopped us out, and photoshopped these guys in orange controlling the puppet. But the really nice thing about that was that after we did that, there was a lot of people who were kind of contacting us and be like, oh, we'd love to sort of have you develop this further. And one of the people that contacted us about it was the Syndicate Festival in Amsterdam, where we first did Funky Forest. And they generally just will let us do the craziest things that we can propose to them, and they never ever question it. So they said, hey, we would love to have you guys do the 2.0 version. And it's actually, it really encourages us to actually do more prototyping, because in a way it's a lot easier to do a prototype and then have someone see that and try and get you to do the full project. Rather than sort of trying to tell someone on paper or convince them that this is a good idea.
So this is our first sketch when we started trying to imagine what this 2.0 version would be like. And we knew that we wanted to have these creatures be gigantic and where you could control larger than life, insane puppets. But I've done some puppeteering in the past, and really one of the best things is the interaction that a puppeteer has with the audience. There's so much fun that can happen there. So we thought it would be really nice to allow the audience to also become participants in the experience. So we have these two levels of interaction where people controlling these giant creatures can also interact with the audience, who can, here we were thinking, right, you can pet the creatures and feed them, and so this is kind of our starting off point.
So we got to our studio in Amsterdam, and immediately we're just thinking about the body again. The first version of our prototype was very kind of quickly hacked together, and so we started from scratch, and we were thinking about the arm and then how the arm is going to connect to the creature. We knew we wanted to do this version with 3D and 3D creatures, so we started thinking about the character packages and how we would kind of structure everything. And then the other big factor was just really doing all the tracking work. We weren't using the Microsoft SDK. We needed the finger detail, and that didn't actually do any of that stuff, so we decided to do everything from scratch. Here you can see we're kind of getting the skeleton of the body with just these white lines, and then the next thing is to really figure out where the arm is. And if you see that kind of white blob over there, it's basically a very heavily blurred version of the image above it. So the idea being that the more you blur it, the more it kind of gets into the center, and that was our way of sort of knowing where the torso was. So we started looking at lines that were lying outside of the torso, and that's sort of what that yellow line is right there. And then once you kind of have what you think is the arm, then it's sort of a kind of a series of steps where you're saying, okay, now let's try and figure out where the tip of the arm is, and then where the elbow is. So after that sort of tedious process, you end up kind of having everything except for being able to sort of detect this. And so we actually do a kind of magnifying glass or a zoom effect, and we know where the hand is, and we actually zoom in on the image, and then we start to look at the contour of the hand and look for kind of concave shapes. But yeah, it took a bit of time. But it ended up being robust enough that we could start testing with some very, very basic, ugly 3D models just to get started.
And this is the first time that we really had the model hooked up that I could actually play with one of the creatures, which was quite exciting. We really also wanted to have the forward-facing motion, which it worked for us, but we had a friend's child come into the office, and his fingers were just a little too small to track, so we decided to scratch that. So here's just, the very first character test, and we originally thought that there would be a whole bunch of different characters, and you could almost puppeteer everything in the environment. Some freaky guys that didn't.
This guy really scared me.
But the more we kind of started thinking about it, we liked this idea of creatures eating things. So we came up with these two pretty simple, basic, two base characters, and then it really became about this idea of you are what you eat. So based on the type of food that the creatures are eating, then their textures will change. So I started just kind of messing around to see if I could really get dramatically different effects on such a simple kind of form. And then we started thinking about an eraser, which was also really nice. So we thought, okay, if the creatures start to eat the clouds, then it will start to take their color away. So the more clouds that they eat, the lighter that they'll become.
And then, we were prototyping in our office at kind of maybe a quarter of the scale. And we were very lucky that actually on the floor below us is this huge, huge empty room that also has a ping pong table in it. And that became a kind of perfect place for us to place our Kinects and start prototyping at a little bit of a larger scale. And we found, the closer that we got to the actual final scale, it really dictated the types of things that actually were engaging. And what worked at a small scale definitely didn't work at a big scale. We had this idea of like words coming out of the creatures' mouths, and then tumbling to the ground, which never ever made it to the final thing.
So once we had the arm tracking was working, the creatures were being mapped well, so then we started thinking about what this audience interaction was. So we started a bunch of tests where food was growing off of your head, and there was
stretching,
collision, and
we actually added this thing where the neck could stretch like elastic, so you could shoot your arm out and then reach things that were much farther away that you normally couldn't reach. And then when you see this guy, who's maybe about this big, shooting towards you with his mouth open, it's absolutely terrifying.
And that was also another thing that came out of being able to test at the larger scale, because at a smaller scale it felt really awkward. But as soon as we had it close to the actual scale, it was felt really nice to just be able to shoot this guy across the screen.
So then actually it was pretty soon after that we were at Cinekid doing the setup, and the screen is ginormous. I think it was 9 meters wide, which I don't know what that is in feet, but and we got everything hooked up, and it was really great to actually see it running on the real screen, full HD, 10,000 lumens. This is a little sketch of the actual setup. You could kind of see the stage.
And there's another camera on that square on the top is a projector. That's then looking down at the people who are against the wall, and we have a trough there with some IR lights kind of flooding the wall so that we can find the silhouette of the person.
So we'll show you a little bit of Puppet Parade at Cinekid. So this is the kind of food creation and the cloud creation process. Kids actually made up their own way of creating food. They often had clapping or wiggling their fingers and involved. Oh yeah, there's also these bushes where if you ate the bushes, they would give you special properties. If you ate the green bush, it would give you feathers. Emily hates the feathers.
The red one allows you to breathe fire, which is kind of nice.
This kid was playing with this for 20 minutes, but he did not move. He just stood there, and every time the puppet came out, he was just And we actually used the motor drivers of the Kinect to adjust the Kinect up and down so that really small kids could use it, and then these gigantic 7-foot tall Dutch people could also use it. It's the largest range of heights that you ever have to work with. We also made it so the heads of the puppets could collide. There's the fire breathing. We thought it'd be funny if it scorched the other puppets, but we started getting down a very dark path with that. And actually, it's a workout. After 15 minutes of doing this, your arms are really, really tired. So that's Puppet Parade. And I think for us the biggest lesson with this was it's always great to do the things at a small scale and prototype things first. And I think kind of going forward, we're going to try and do more of that stuff where we just kind of put proof of concepts out, and then let people come and try and kind of get excited about those, and instead of just trying to kind of think about the finished thing from the very start. And kind of a special thing we did for the I/O, which we haven't sort of done before, is we made a kind of a tool that just does the arm tracking from Puppet Parade. and it actually does the arm tracking and sends it out of open sound control. So actually, I should be able to demo this. And we put this on the USB sticks, and I think some of the USB sticks, the app's not running because of, I think, some Windows like permissions issues, but it's an OS X app that tracks your arm and does everything that's going on in Puppet Parade, and you can kind of see it in action. You can play with the sliders and probably make things worse, honestly. But we also included a little demo, so you can see sort of how you could have an application written in Flash, in Max MSP, in processing, in Cinder, in almost any framework that has open sound control. That's basically just letting our arm tracking app do the hard work and then kind of figuring out something interesting to do with the results. So in case it's not working for you guys, we're also going to post it on our Twitter, which we'll put up at the end of the presentation. And then we're going to later put the source code on GitHub, probably in a week or two. So maybe you guys could help fix a few bugs.
Yeah. So the next project is kind of been, for the last 6 months, we have been super lucky to be artist in residence at the New York Hall of Science, which is in Queens. And it's a science museum for children and a research center, and it's just a really amazing space.
And then there's also one particularly amazing space at NICI, which is this building called the Great Hall. I think Bjork did a concert there recently. It was actually designed for the World's Fair like over 50 years ago, and it was meant to simulate the feeling of being in deep space. It's a really incredible space with like 80-foot high ceilings.
So our task at NICI was to think about this great hall space and to prototype and research new ideas around the theme of sustainability.
So immediately we got started testing like testing the equipment that we were going to work with and testing kind of color palettes, seeing how the projection looked. We also did some very quick prototypes of like kind of ways to reveal data, hidden data within an interactive installation. We also did some projection tests in the Great Hall space, which we had a feeling wouldn't take projection very well, but we just wanted to see what was possible. This is us projecting Night Bright and some crazy patterns. We also looked at some sort of aspects of gaming and kind of resource management, like an early version of SimEarth called Micropolis. And we started playing a little bit with game of life type principles. And this is like a little OF app that was actually doing rule-based game of life simulations where you had water, the forest, and the city. And getting kind of different configurations based on the starting conditions.
So we really got into this idea of shared resources. So the next thing we decided to do is kind of come up with this game. It was like our Reactable-inspired tabletop there. But basically, each person had their own island, which had its own resources, but you didn't have all the resources that you need. So we kind of used these wooden blocks to represent different resources like energy and water and food. And it was kind of trying to come up with this dialogue in this game of figuring out how to share resources and where you're looking out for yourself, but you kind of need other people as well.
And then we really like this idea of shared resources, and then also kind of connected installations. Ever since we did Funky Forest, we actually always envisioned this idea of multiple installations where the actions in one installation would actually affect the conditions in another installation. And so so we started sketching out some different possible installations that could all be interconnected. One of the ones that we really liked was this idea of kind of a farming or a harvesting installation where people could grow and harvest crops and then send those crops to the city. And both of those, both the city and the farms would both kind of be using a shared resource of water. Yeah, they're kind of like, that was one of the things we started with.
And another thing we were thinking about, which would be really nice, is to have this shared object for the space and really mixing the physical space and the digital space. And I can't stress enough how awesome it is. I think it feels really magical and really changes the experience when you can kind of take something off a screen and take it away with you.
Yeah, you got very possessive with that stuff.
I was like a squirrel.
So we did a prototype with kind of sanitation and waste. Emily didn't design this one. This is my drawing. So this is a sanitation garbage truck. You have to use your imagination. When you take it to where the rubbish is, the system detects that this is backing up to it and collects the rubbish. And it's really strange that my shirt happened to match the design that day. We have rubbish in our little truck. There might be some room for more, so let's collect this rubbish. I got kind of a little bit lost. Getting a little bit more full. This is just very early proof of concept. And a lot of this stuff is just not so much to kind of convey the final experience, but just to test something. So in this case, we were just testing, like, could we do the same thing but between two installations, where we could bring food, for example, from one installation to another and deposit it in another space. And here you can see the level kind of shows how much food is still in the truck that needs to be deposited.
So we took what we really liked about having this physical object, and we went back to that gigantic sketch and decided to build out first this harvesting installation where it's all about now resource creation. So we first started thinking about, okay, this, like, how do we harvest, and this, like, swiping action.
Sort of Fruit Ninja inspired chopping of the corn.
And then we knew that we wanted a way to water the crops, so we had a Connect that was looking straight down the wall to see when you were kind of doing the slicing, and we added a second camera looking from behind to detect your watering gesture.
So we developed this kind of crazy watering gesture that involved putting your hands above your head and kind of pointing where you wanted the water to go.
And we kind of had this conveyor belt with a silo, so as you've harvested your crops, they get collected and stored in this silo, and then you need your RFID-enabled farm truck to come and collect the resource.
And this was like just a prototype demo day we did at Eyeo for one day. So it works great when you have two people. Emily was much better at chopping corn than me.
So then you can see what happens here. The conveyor belt stops when the silo is full, because you kind of needed to have this sense of urgency.
And now we've collected 643 pounds of corn to take to the city. And actually corn felt like a kind of culturally appropriate crop to be growing. We also had a little visitor, a girl and her father, who snuck in, and then it was really kind of this moment where we didn't know if it was going to work, because she was absolutely tiny, and she just like started cutting corn straight away. So it was really great.
So then we kind of, after that would be the middle circle, we went back to our Connected Worlds sketch again, and then decided to kind of expand on this and build out the water resource side of it and then the city side of it, and to really test this idea of having interconnected installations.
So this was our final prototype day at Eyeo, where we set up the city on the left, the water management station on the right, and then the farming installation in the center that had a few little new things that we had developed.
So we immediately realized during the first prototype that watering like this is not intuitive at all and does not make sense. So we started thinking about, okay, what can we do that's still easy to prototype and test the idea? So we came up with this idea of a hose where we just put a little IR filter over a mag light, and it worked pretty well.
An idea borrowed from Chris O'Shea, I have to say, in London. And here it is in action. Much less embarrassing than doing this. Another thing we wanted a way that kids could like pump water to the city, and in a very physical way, like adding the hose to the farm. And we were really struggling with this for like 3 or 4 days. We were thinking about getting like firemen's hoses and like having kids like dragging these things around. And then as we were sort of like struggling with this, on the other side of our apartment, there was just this bike pump sitting there, and I'm like, oh my god, this is perfect. But I had no idea, I couldn't think about how to hook it up quickly. It was like the day before the installation. I called up Kyle McDonald, who's also giving a talk here, and I'm like, Kyle, what's the quickest way you think I can get this data into the computer? And I was like thinking of IR sensors and all these like crazy, like overcomplicated solutions. And he's like, what about like a contact mic, just listening to the sound? And I'm like, oh my god, okay, bye. And a few minutes later, I sent this video of like it working really well, and it's sort of actually delayed, but it works perfectly. I destroyed a pair of headphones actually in the process. It sucked all the electronics out by the end of the day, but it was worth it. Another thing we developed for this, which is sort of like the hidden thing that's behind the installations, is this idea of an OFX networked value, or just like the idea that you could have kind of properties that don't belong to any installation, but they're actually kind of shared amongst all the installations. I guess it's kind of like a kind of cloud variable, which is like not a very sexy term, I guess, but basically one installation will shout out about something, and another installation's like, oh, that's great, but you thought it was this, but now it's this. And it's like really kind of a just decentralized approach, and that allowed for things like the kids like collecting corn, and then actually instead of depositing it, going back and adding to their trucks because their trucks weren't full. And yeah, that's kind of it made the prototyping process very quick and a lot of fun actually. So this is the kind of little kind of video compilation of some of the footage from the prototyping day. We were really excited just to see the kids immediately understanding how the farming installation works, just chopping away at the corn, watering, and they're really kind of talking to each other like, we need you to water, like not over there, there's already corn there, like go over here. And we were worried a bit about the physical boxes because we really enjoyed them, but we were kind of not sure what kids would think. And they seemed to, like, they would actually hold on to them for a long time and deliver food to the city and then kind of be urgently running back. And it's like 25, 30 feet. It was exhausting. Like, we did it for 5 minutes and we were knackered. And, these kids were just like running back and forth. And there's a lot actually going on. Like, you could make buildings by kind of sticking your arms up, but then you're actually increasing the resources that your city needs. And they actually managed to turn every single area into a building.
It was wild, because when we were kind of setting things up, we're just testing with the two of us, so we obviously could not physically do what then, as soon as it started, like the city just looked insane, and we were just hoping it wouldn't crash.
Those kids were monsters. So actually, one of the things is that once you ran out of water, you could see sort of who was using the most water, and your reservoir would actually run dry. So the water management person had to constantly be kind of figuring out where we should be pulling water from. And actually, you would see kids arguing with the farmers, and they're like, you're using too much water. Like, I don't have enough water for the city, And then, but at the same time, the same kids would be like, but you need to make more food. And the farmer's like, okay, I can't make food without watering their crops. So it was like this really crazy balance. And, we wanted to see what would happen when kids actually were kind of stuck with this thing where they had to kind of make these choices and these decisions. And it was great. We had like small, like 7-year-old kids explaining to us how it works. And, but they did a much better job than we could do. We're getting too old, I guess. Sorry. So there's actually a lot more stuff coming from our kind of NICEI collaboration. We started a Tumblr at design-io.nicei.org, and we're just posting a ton of stuff. There's a lot of stuff we didn't get to show you today, and there'll be a lot of more interesting stuff, I think, coming in the future. So this is a project called the Painted Mirror, which we haven't shown anywhere to anyone really. It's a pretty new project. We really, after last year, we were showing you guys a little bit of sketching software that we were playing with, and we really got excited by this idea of kind of being able to draw people into different worlds. And we got contacted by a children's library in Utah, and we thought, like, what if we could, like, draw children into kind of the illustration so they could almost step inside of a book and step inside of like different illustration styles. We really love Chris Van Allsburg, and so these are kind of a few of the references. So for sort of different kind of illustration styles to explore. So once they kind of said, sure, that sounds crazy, but awesome, we got started and we just kind of hooked up a Connect to do the keying essentially, and then started playing around with shaders to sort of draw people into these worlds. there was a kind of a lot of early mistakes that we made, and just trying to figure out how you could kind of do things like watercolor or collage, and so this is some of the really early stuff. We were also playing a little bit with using things like vector fields to kind of create a wood block type effect. It was actually kind of a challenge to mix the kind of the illustration and the photography.
Yeah, it was just kind of a different design process for us as well, since we were kind of doing post effects on the designs, that there was a lot of back and forth just to really figure out the best way to set up the assets so that once you've added the live feed into it, that they really felt like a seamless kind of environment.
Some other stuff that didn't make it, sort of really kind of ugly, trying to do watercolors. We found this effect we really liked, that he was using like an OpenCV mean shift algorithm, which kind of gives a very painterly effect, especially that shot on the left. But it's like so ridiculously slow, and we were doing like HD, and it was like I think 3 frames a second. So maybe like in a year or two, and then so a little bit also trying to figure out how to draw, how to sketch, how to do kind of pencil style drawings. So doing stuff where we're kind of filling in regions that have similar colors, and kind of building things up. Just other random stuff. So the final installation was a very large LCD screen with Xbox Connect tastefully disguised inside of a nice metal box. And this was just when we kind of first got it running. And we'll show you some actually screen capture video. It's very hard to document because it's very detailed, and it's sort of in HD. So this is even sort of looking a little bit different to how it actually looks at full resolution.
And here we added little bits of the story, like clues along the wall. So as you continue through this loose narrative, you get little hints about what's to come.
And we made a little magnifying glass. So this one was sort of the one that was sort of a little bit inspired by Chris Van Allsburg. It's very like fine pencil drawings. And as you sort of moved around from one side to the other, you could kind of change perspectives.
Yeah, there are lots of little Easter eggs hidden in these things.
And then I think, let's see if we can jump ahead. This is like an 800 megabyte video. This is one of my favorite ones, which is sort of like a paper collage type approach. And it basically finds areas of kind of low detail and high detail, and then tries to fit different shapes, pieces of paper to them. So you can see that where there's detail, you have much smaller pieces. You also had control over the sun, so as you came closer, the sun would rise, and as you stepped back, the sun would go back. We'll just show you one more. This is another favorite, which is sort of like a little bit of trying to do like an oil painting type thing, where we had paint kind of following lines, and as you stood still, it would the detail would get much more, and then the more you moved, the more loose the feeling of the painting would get. And then the last chapter was called Coming Home, and you sort of like a pencil sketch style. I do not know what I'm doing right now. Okay.
Okay, now for something completely different. This actually we're really, really excited to show. It's a super early prototype, like a week old, of something new that we're playing around with. So here it is.
Let's just say it involves a high-speed motor and an iPad. And a lot of metal, which cannot be a good thing. So we won't just let the video play.
Oh, shit.
We thought about bringing it.
What is that?
It's very dangerous.
It's not at the safe stage yet.
So this is us just sort of testing the alignment of the shaft and making sure nothing was going to go flying. So like some low RPM, testing it a bit vertically. And so
Oh wow, and you can actually see the camera.
now it's at 800 RPM. We had a little glass sheet right there, like Mythbuster style. But the kind of principle that we're playing with is, if we could rotate an iPad really fast, and if we could synchronize that rotation to the rotation of a 3D object on the screen, we kind of create the effect where you could see something from like different angles, and as you walk around it, you would be able to change your perspective of the object. So in a way, it's sort of like a low-tech ghetto hologram. And it actually doesn't, it looks a little bit better in person. Something about the shutter speed of the camera interferes with it. But you could really, right now already, you can walk around the holopad and kind of, you know, see this guy from different perspectives.
We're also going to play around with putting like a privacy screen onto it just to like really narrow down the viewing angle.
But here's a better shot of it. And you know, as you come around, you see the guy from the front. And then, you know, going back around, you start to see him from the side and from behind. And this is really actually just an early proof of concept. We're so excited that it works, because otherwise it was just like a bit of a waste of money. And you know, already now we're like thinking about like, okay, now that we've got it working, what can we do with it? You can actually see when we stop it, kind of what's actually going on the screen. So yeah, very early prototype. This was sort of done specially for I/O, and. So stay tuned for more, and thank you guys very much.
Thank you.